both Putin and Xi Jinping were absent from the G20 conference this year.
They also set this lofty goal of tripling renewable energy capacity by 2030, which will only cost $4 trillion per year, but they did not lay out a plan for how they're going to achieve this. I'm Stephanie Keith.
And I am Tara Manjekovic, and we are Unapologetically Outspoken. Okay, Stephanie, so the G20 summit just took place over the weekend in New Delhi, India. And have you heard of that?
Yeah.
Okay. So for people who haven't, it's basically similar to the G7, where you have world leaders coming together and they kind of meet and try to figure out their agreements on issues affecting global politics. But instead of just representing the Western industrialized countries like the G7 does, the G20 consists of like the European Union and then 19 of the world's most powerful countries when you're looking at it in terms of their politics, the economy, military, and population. And the G20, I guess, was created back in the late 1990s to address the Asian financial crisis that was affecting the world. And since then, G20 summits have been held, or they've been held every year since 2008. And this may sound like a boring who cares topic, but the G20 countries collectively contribute to 85% of the global economic output, which is the world's GDP. And according to an article I read on Medium, the G20 accounts for more than 75% of global trade, and more than 2/3 of the world's population live in these countries. And I'm bringing up this topic because the G20 conference or summit they just had is relevant to a lot of the things that we talk about on this podcast, including our economy, the global climate agenda, and the power plays that are going on with like Russia and China in this chess game to weaken the United States. And so speaking of Russia and China, both Putin and Xi Jinping were absent from the G20 conference this year, which is also significant. And I guess China and Russia were still represented at the conference, but both leaders sent like lesser officials in their place. And I think it was kind of expected with Russia, but not really with China. And so last Friday, we talked a lot about China and some of the threats that we're facing with their growing military capacity and how they've infiltrated the United States through their spy programs and espionage. And as China is strengthening their ties with Russia, they're pulling away from the G20. And I read an article in The Atlantic where the author stated, quote, "Ditching the summit marks a dramatic turn in China's foreign policy. Xi Jinping deemed it not worth his time. His absence sends a stark signal. China is done with the established world order." And so what is the response to this from the United States? Well, other than Biden saying he was disappointed that Xi Jinping wouldn't be there, I swear I read more about like triple, quadruple, whatever vaccinated Joe Biden getting COVID again, and then how Biden had to be tested like multiple times before he could head off to India. And like literally nothing about actual concerns with global politics, but just, you know, the health issues with COVID. And CBS News did a report. They were saying like Biden's intention was to pitch the message that America's economy is strong. Like that was going to be his stance in the conference. And I think most Americans would strongly disagree with that. And in case you haven't heard, Biden just approved yet another $1 billion aid package to the Ukraine this past Friday. And this CBS News article also mentioned that Biden attending the G20 summit was going to be a political opportunity for him because his approval ratings are so fucking dismal. And so his reelection campaign was using this trip as a way to promote his leadership. And frankly, I have a very hard time saying, you know, Biden and leadership together with a straight face. But their whole point was to like promote his leadership on the global stage because they put out this new ad, which I guess was scheduled to run in battleground states on 60 Minutes while he was at the summit. And Stephanie, do you think that that ad highlighted the 382 days that he spent on vacation since he became president?
No, of course not. They never want to talk about, you know, the negative with Biden, just Trump. But, you know, they'll keep praising him until they decide that they're going to take him out right before the election. And I was actually listening to a podcast interview on Megyn Kelly this morning with Rick Grinnell, who has worked on many campaigns. And he had a really interesting theory that I had not heard yet. And he was saying that He knows how calculating the Democrats are and how they realize that when people go to the polls, they'll ultimately vote on the high gas prices and food that they've been paying for under Biden, and he'll lose. So he predicts that they're going to wait until about 2 weeks before the convention to come up with a reason that Biden can't run, like a health reason or whatever. And then they'll take it to the convention. And then there's going to be a fight between Newsom and Kamala Harris. And they'll bring in a third candidate, which he predicts is going to be Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan. And that really surprised me. But the reason he said that this is what he thinks they're going to do is because he's like, there's no way that they can go with another straight white guy. And they sure as hell aren't going to put Kamala in there. But Gretchen Whitmer, who was one of the biggest COVID dictators, apparently won big in Michigan. And it was due to like her whole stance on the abortion issue. And that's the issue that they'll end up having the media focus on. And then it's also a way that they can have the first female president that isn't Kamala, because obviously they have to check a box. And he said that this is entirely possible to have this all decided at the convention. And apparently it's been done many times where they chose the candidate. I didn't realize that. But he was just saying, like, yeah, we think that our vote counts, but it doesn't. Like, they get the person that they want in place. And the first, like I said, it was the first time I heard about this, but to me, it sounds exactly like a sneaky ass move the Democrats would pull. And I think Rick Grinnell would know more than anyone else because he has so much campaign experience and he's seen all of these things behind the scenes. So I don't know. What do you think, Tara? Think they're going to pull the old bait and switch right before the election?
I have literally heard so many interesting theories about how the left is going to rig the election. And I can't remember which podcast I heard this on. I think it was Real AF, but I'm not sure. And they were discussing this theory that I guess was in a news article I couldn't find, but it was something about how a lot of Democrats are going to vote Republican in the primaries so that they can purposely vote for Trump to ensure he's the Republican candidate for the general election and then make it look like he's a shoo-in for the presidency because they know Biden's not going to have a chance of winning against Trump. And so after getting Trump in the primaries, they'll find a way to dump Biden or maybe finally admit he has dementia and have him removed as a candidate. And then at the last hour, kind of like you were saying, that Biden would be replaced with someone like Newsom, or they mentioned Michelle Obama. And then all the liberals who voted Republican would then turn around and vote for whomever the Cobb Mafia puts in place for the presidency. And then when that happens, it's like game over for any chance at getting our country back. And then, but let's take a look at things, right? Until then, we've got another fucking year or so of Biden, and he will continue to carry out his agenda of putting America last. And I think that some of his moves at the G20 summit like confirm this even more. So I want to talk a little bit more about that. And since the G20 started, it's basically been a way for the United States to maintain a significant role on the world stage in terms of like international economic policy. And we've talked about this several times, but until recently, the US dollar has been the reserve currency for the world through the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the World Trade Organization. But now we have the rise of the BRICS nations growing stronger. And interestingly, I read an article in the Gateway Pundit, and it stated, quote, "It is no coincidence that the G20 meeting in India comes on the heels of the successful BRICS summit 2 weeks ago in South Africa. BRICS is growing and has a long list of countries from the global south clamoring for membership, while the G20 is losing its luster and clout. 2 years ago, Russia and China were chafing at being held hostage to the US dollar in order to conduct international trade and did not have any viable alternative. That reality is now changing and changing rapidly. At least 6 of the G20 members are working intensely to set up trade regimens that operate independent of the dollar. The United States and Europe's egregious use of sanctions against Russia and China has fractured the foundations of the G20 and created a growing movement among the largest countries in terms of population who are no longer willing to submit to the United States using the dollar to punish them." So I thought that was interesting. And it's what?
Okay, speaking of the dollar, I saw a video the other day of these guys like that went up and they were filming these Mexican workers building the wall at the border. And they were like, oh, so now, the Biden administration decides to build a wall. And the guy looks at them and he's like, oh, no, no, no. We're hired by the Mexican government. We're Mexican. And he's like, why is the Mexican government building the wall? He's like, this is the first I've heard of it. And the guy's like, oh, he's like, they're really worried that all these people that crossed the border are going to come pouring back into Mexico. And the guy's like, what are you talking about? And he's like, haven't you heard, like, the US dollar is about to collapse, man? Like, it's going to be crazy. And he's like, Mexico's like, they want this up immediately. He's like, we're working overtime to get this built because they're closing off the border. And who knows, like, that could be total bullshit. But I was just like, it seems like when you look at any other news station outside of the US propaganda, they're all saying the same thing, that the dollar's going to collapse. And they're like pulling their funds out and getting prepared for it. So, I mean, it doesn't seem that far-fetched.
Yeah, I haven't seen that, but I would not doubt that that's accurate. And honestly, it's not just even our economy that's at risk right now, because there's a lot of tension taking place between countries who are members of the G20. And many of them are like divided on their loyalties, especially in terms of their stance on the Russia-Ukraine war. And there's several countries, including India, that are allies of Russia. There's the China-Taiwan-US situation. There's like rebellions, instability, and violence taking place in Africa. And then there's the situation with the United States relationship with Syria and the Middle East in terms of oil. And so during the summit, Biden apparently unveiled his plans for this new infrastructure project to connect India to the Middle East and Europe, because he's going to build a rail and shipping corridor that's going to enable more effective cross-border transit of goods and services. And he's basically taking like this whole plan was his idea. This is like the greatest thing since sliced bread. And I read that CBS News article I referenced earlier. It talked about how this project is one of the Biden administration's key initiatives in the Middle East to try and counter China's growing influence. But I read an article in a UK publication called iNews that was talking about how this year's summit could actually accelerate the decline of America's power on the world stage. Because while Biden is like praising himself for creating this new economic corridor, we're actually 10 years behind China's infrastructure program, which is called the BRI, or the Belt and Road Initiative. And that includes like Africa, Latin America, Eastern Europe, and Asia. So like they've had this in progress for 10 years. And now Biden just, suddenly has this great idea that we're going to build one. And so where's the money coming to pay for Biden's new large-scale infrastructure project? Well, apparently it's going to be paid for by the G7, which means primarily the United States. So once again, we're going to ignore the problems that we have in our own country, and we're going to continue throwing money at basically every other project in every other country. And of course, no global summit would be complete without addressing the manufactured climate crisis. And so another one of the things that Biden is touting is that there was an agreement reached between the United States, India, Argentina, Brazil, Italy. I don't know how you pronounce this. Mauritius?
I have no idea.
Sorry, guys. And the United Arab Emirates to launch something called the Global Biofuels Alliance. And the White House described this in their statement as, quote, a partnership to make progress in our shared commitment to deploy cleaner, greener fuels around the world that help meet our decarbonization goals.
Yeah. Well, I'm just thinking it's like this whole infrastructure thing. They have no choice. They realize if we go to war with China, we're fucked. So they're going to try and switch to get all of our goods and everything from India, which is a growing market. So again, though, how are they going to fund it? Like, oh, the United States is going to pay for it, the G7. Really? When we sent all of our money to Ukraine? Like, typical, Biden administration, they have no plan in place whatsoever. And then they also set this lofty goal of tripling renewable energy capacity by 2030, which will only cost $4 trillion per year. But they did not lay out a plan for how they're going to achieve this. And it's just like, It reminds me of kids with like a Christmas wish list, but
Yeah.
no real understanding of how much all this shit's going to cost or like who's going to fund it.
Yeah. It's like monopoly money and
Yeah,
just keep printing more.
I know. It's crazy. But speaking of like the whole, climate crisis issue, you got to hear this clip from Governor Green of Hawaii holding a Q&A press conference with reporters. And I think he basically just revealed the real global agenda behind this whole climate crisis, like all around the world. So listen to this clip.
The problem we have, of course, is we are in an era of global, climate change. And what we do in Hawaii, we will be able to lead by example as far as mitigating efforts and our pain. When people see the pain that we've suffered, they're going to take us seriously. It's an unusual thing for a person like me to get to speak to a very broad audience, a broad international audience, but I will make this case. Smart.
Okay, did you hear at the end there how he slipped up and he said smart cities?
Yeah, just
Like I'm making the case for smart city. And then he went on to like correct himself and say smart decisions. But Tara, like I wish you could see the video because after he slipped and said smart cities, his face turned like beet red. Then he started stumbling his words, like clearly nervous that he totally fucked up and said that out loud. And then he starts like chugging water. And I was like, oh my God, he literally just pretty much laid out the plan. So
but he should have done it like Biden would do it, where you just fucking say and then you don't even try to backtrack. You just leave it all out there and then the administration will pretend it never happened.
And then you fall off the stage.
Yeah.
So besides slipping up about smart cities, which we all know that's just code word for 15-minute cities, right? But the other thing he said at the beginning revealed a possible motive for the Maui fires. And at this point, like the whole conspiracy theory that the fires were intentionally started. We've done plenty of episodes on that. Well, the governor said that this is due to global warming and that these horrific, terrifying events will get people to take them seriously and listen to them. That climate change is real. See, look how many people died because of it. And we know that they gain power through fear. Like, just look at how much power they got when everyone was afraid of COVID. Well, if they start saying that these horrific, fatal events are being caused by climate change, that's going to get the people who aren't paying attention or thinking critically to do whatever they say out of fear, like moving into a utopian smart city that's green and the government will take care of them and keep them safe. Meanwhile, it's really a concentration camp and you sign your rights away to the state. Mm-hmm. And Tara, I know like we laugh all the time about these climate alarmists, but the fact that this was a top item at a world meeting tells me like they're all in on it and they're all going to be using this as a power grab. So to all of our listeners, don't fall for the fear. This is all bullshit that they're going to start selling to get you to move or give up your car, give up your house, give up your land, and do other drastic things all in the name of fear. Don't freaking fall for it.
Yeah. And if our country does turn around, which is so doubtful at this point, but if it does, I bet you it's going to come out that all of these, quote, climate emergencies were actually like all these fires and all these, train derailments and everything, that they're fucking acts of terrorism by fucking climate alarmists. I guarantee you.
Yes. And I actually, we'll do another Maui episode because I cannot stop talking about it. Like, I'm sorry to get us like derailed today, but it's just like a bigger event than I think we realize. But I was watching they had another city council meeting and there were so many people. And I mean like liberals too, like far left liberals that were getting up there and calling it out. And they were like, this was man-made. This was not the climate. This was not a hurricane. This was the government trying to grab the land. So they're all putting it out there. And I'm glad to see that people are waking up to like what's really going on.
Well, and since you brought up Maui, remember how last week you mentioned, I don't know, maybe it was the week before, how the relief funds for the victims of the Maui fires and Hurricane Idalia were attached to the bill that was like providing billions of our taxpayer dollars to send more aid to Ukraine?
Yep.
Well, last Wednesday, when KJP was giving her press conference about Biden going to the G20 summit, she was talking about how it's our, quote, job and our duty to continue to send aid to Ukraine because 16 civilians died there last week. I mean, fuck the 1,000+ people who have died, or I guess it's really only 100, but the rest that are still, quote, missing, which AKA means dead in Maui right now, and fuck the victims of the hurricane and the fires in Louisiana and every other tragic incident that's happening here in the United States, because apparently our priority is to continue to send billions to Ukraine.
Yeah. Well, and we could do a whole separate episode on this, but I was listening again to podcasts throughout the weekend, and they were saying that it is up to 500,000 men who have died in the Ukraine war so far. And people are like trying to get fake passports. They're trying to leave Ukraine because they're just going to people's doors, and any man that's there, they're like, you're going to go out there. 500,000, 500,000 men have died, yet we keep sending money and letting more and more and more people die. It's fucking crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy. And then when KJP was talking about this, she was saying that like one of Biden's intentions in going to this G20 conference was to talk about our commitment to the Ukraine and to make sure that the people of Ukraine, because they're bravely fighting for democracy and their sovereignty, we're going to make sure that we give them what they need to fight against Russia. And so here's what I also thought was interesting about this summit, because during last year's summit, there was a collective statement made against Russia, and it was said, quote, most members strongly condemned the war in Ukraine. And there was language in this statement. It was a longer statement, but there was language that was basically demanding that Russia withdraw from Ukraine. Well, during this year's summit, that statement was recalled, and it was replaced with an agreement to adopt a consensus statement condemning the invasion of Ukraine, but no fucking mention of Russia, which I think is totally bizarre, right? So instead of outright condemning Russia or even addressing Russia's involvement at all, I want to read the joint statement on Ukraine that came out from the G20. And it says, quote, we call on all states to uphold the principles of international law, including territorial integrity and sovereignty, international humanitarian law, and the multilateral system that safeguards peace and stability. We welcome all relevant and constructive initiatives that support a comprehensive, just, and durable peace in Ukraine. In line with the United Nations Charter, all states must refrain from the threat or use of force to seek territorial acquisition against the territorial integrity and sovereignty or political independence of any state. The use or threat of use of nuclear weapons is inadmissible. I'm sorry, but I think we're kind of past this point already, aren't we? Like, the war in Ukraine has been ongoing for almost 2 years. You have China, Russia, and the United States who have all threatened to use nuclear weapons against each other. And like, is it just me, or is this statement absolutely asinine and pointless?
Well, yeah. And do you really think they would have made that statement if Putin and Xi Jinping were really there?
Exactly.
Maybe that's why they didn't show up, because they knew, there was going to be this kind of wording, and they don't want to agree to it because, China wants to get Taiwan. Yeah. Obviously, Russia wants, part of Ukraine. So it's like, that makes sense. And then the fact that you said they were so like united with this whole Ukraine issue last year and they're not this year makes me think, well, number one, everyone can see plainly what's going on here, right? But number two, like, a lot of these nations have either joined BRICS already, like Saudi Arabia, or are thinking about it. So they're not going to go and bash Russia when they're about to join currency with them.
Right.
So it's like, and that's the thing, just like you were saying, not a lot of people are really paying attention to this, or they don't think it's important. And the news sure as hell isn't covering it. They're all talking about Trump and Hunter Biden. Yeah. But meanwhile, like, it's pretty plain and clear when we lay it out what's going on here and how the United States is losing its dominance. People are looking at the United States as a bully, and they're sick of it, and they're all banding together. And right now, they're going to be nice at this summit, but basically it's like, fuck you. We can team up with Russia and China and be, happier. And honestly, like, I think these summits are nothing but theatrics, just like we talked about, with Congress and everything. I think it's one big performance to be like, see, like, we all are getting along and coming up with these great initiatives. But like, meanwhile, when the cameras aren't recording and the news press has left, they're, talking about how like they're going to create more and more problems, like this climate crisis, to gain more power and more control over the people. So, they agreed that they won't go nuclear, but they didn't agree that they're not going to use EMPs or DEWs. That was another thing. It's like, okay, that's great that they're all saying we're not going to threaten nuclear weapons, but does that really matter? I mean, we had a whole episode on Friday where we discussed how an EMP or a direct energy weapon would be just as horrible and devastating to a country.
Right. And you also brought up that Biden's goal of like tripling our renewable energy capacity by 2030 for fucking $4 trillion. And everything this administration is doing is going towards clean, renewable energy and green energy, which is, as we said last week, exactly what is going to take out this fucking country.
Well, meanwhile, you have China that's building like how many coal plants every single day. You have Africa that's mining like crazy.
Yeah. And Biden just canceled all of the remaining oil contracts in Alaska last week.
Of course he did.
Yeah.
Of course,
Because we're going to save the Alaskan rainforest or something. And that's not what it was, but like, we're going to make it a, preserved area. So we're going to close any mining capabilities.
Well, we've been hearing about it. I mean, we've talked about this in depth, but we know like they keep saying this winter is going to be the winter. That's like really bad. People are going to feel that. And so again, like with the whole election thing, when people get a heating bill that is as much as their mortgage, do you think they're going to keep voting for this bullshit? No,
right.
They're not. And all this climate bullshit at this meeting, when you have China that's destroying the climate, you have the Nord Stream pipeline that we know was sabotage, and we can argue over who did it, but the point is someone at that meeting did it, whether it was us or Russia, like they say, or someone else. Someone did it. That was the biggest CO2 release in history ever. And yet they're going to talk about climate change. Like, that's what I mean. It's theatrics. It's theatrics to make it seem like, oh yeah, they're helping the world, when really they're not. They're not helping the people. They're all in a power grab. And you and I can see right through it. And I think so can most Americans.
But for everyone who is still like loving this green agenda and wants everything to be electric, just wait until it is the middle of winter and the government has full control of all of your utilities and you don't agree with something that they're saying. And guess what? You're going to freeze to death.
Yeah. Or there's an EMP attack and you can't use your car or any other electric devices for months and months and months. So yeah, like it's all bullshit. But I really do think so many people are waking up to it more and more, like constantly. And if you want to have some fun this week, just go and look at the comments on some of these like big celebrities or politicians that post this bullshit. And you'll see like every comment is against this whole agenda. Like Jamie Lee Curtis did some post wearing a mask saying it's time we mask up again because a COVID variant is back. And literally she had to stop the comments because everyone was like just attacking her. They were like, this is so ridiculous and we're not falling for it again.
Did you see last week too? I guess there was a clip of Whoopi Goldberg, because she's on The View.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. She apparently has COVID after her fucking quadruple vaccinations. And she was filming from her bedroom with a mask on in her own home.
Wow.
Not even in the studio. Like, and she was sitting there with a mask on. Like, I'm like, what the fuck is wrong with these people? You're in your own home, in your bedroom, filming yourself with a mask on. Like, the absolute insanity of it all.
Shows how easily people can be brainwashed. But I think it's funny too how all of these like quadruple vaxxers all are the ones getting COVID right now. Like, you might want to look at that.
Maybe that's how they're going to kill off Biden. When he comes back from this G20 summit, people have gotten gotten COVID. I don't know.
Even like a little sniffle would take that guy out. Like he's so frail. It's really bad. Oh, geez. And then we have Kamala to look forward to, but they'll take her out too, I'm sure. Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, we will be back on Wednesday with more updates. And in the meantime, just don't fall for the fear and bullshit. Everything will be okay if we don't listen to them. Don't comply. All right. Thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll see you next time. If you're sick of all the crazy shit going on in our country and you want to express your support and patriotism for the show, head on over to our Etsy store at UO Patriot Chicks and check out our new stickers. The link can also be found on our website. If you love the show and you want exclusive episodes, support the podcast and join the conversation by becoming a member of our Patreon community. We'll be posting weekly member-only podcast episodes and content that isn't available on the weekly podcast. Every Patreon member will also get a free Unapologetically Outspoken sticker and updates about our new sticker release before they're made public. And be sure to follow us on TikTok at Unapologetically Outspoken. And if you haven't done so already, please rate and review the podcast. The more you support us, the more people we can reach. So help us spread the word.